Useless Monster by Mute Crows. Chapter 35, or Chapter 34. He woke up with a start. His only company was the vague sense of missing something. Well, that wasn't quite true. He felt the start-up of Marble's purring as she stretched out, draping over his neck and shoulder in her sleep. In his hand, his phone was clasped tightly. His eyes burned as he sucked in a shaky breath. Unlocking it showed the photo of the shrine, phone light glowing far too brightly in his dark room. He locked it back and closed his eyes again. He wanted to sleep again. He just wanted everything to stop. He didn't know what he wanted. As his lungs started to shake, breath not cooperating, Marble chirruped in a questioning tone. She rolled so her whiskers were brushing his face. Her purring grew louder as she meowed again. "Sorry, Marble." He started to try and push her to where she could sleep away from him, but she pressed forward. Her paws kneaded rapidly as she scooted until she could press her head against him. He pet her for a moment, waiting until she settled before waking his phone again. It was barely past 3 in the morning. The clock on the screen steadily ticked the seconds by as he watched. He sighed before sitting up. He knew he wouldn't be able to fall back asleep tonight. Extra care was taken to not jostle and reawaken Marble as he clambered over her to stand. He noticed the physical photo on the stand, hesitated, then picked it up. There wasn't any difference, obviously, from the one on Izuku's phone, but he was somehow settled in his core once holding it. The ability to physically touch the image made it different. He had no way to explain it. How do you explain the security of holding something physical? Of the tactile reassurance? He knew it wasn't the shrine itself, just like how he knew the photos he had of her weren't the same as her being there, but the relief it gave was visceral. He wanted to get out. He couldn't be here right now. The weight of his school uniform felt heavier than usual as he put it on, a reminder of the general normalcy he would have to resume, the fact that he would have to keep up a way to hold the truth away from the others. The guilt that came with the mere thought of doing that, let alone setting up the walls he needed to do it. It hurt so badly, carving away so much to hide it all. He was so tired of it, but he didn't know how to handle being alone like this. He didn't know how to handle not being alone like this either. I want help. There was only one person he could think of to even ask for it, too. It was still long until sunrise, but he needed the walk at the very least. He put on his shoes as silently as he could, took a paper out of his bag, and left a note next to Aizawa's boots to say where he had gone. The lock clicking shut felt too loud in the early morning. The sky was still dark as it could be in a city. Anxiety reared his head at the fact that he was leaving without asking, but he forced into his mind that he was allowed to do this. He had even gone the extra step of leaving a note. He repeated as much mentally as he walked. The path he took was as familiar as the alleys around Dagobah. His strides were long, confident even, when his heart and mind weren't. It felt invasive. He never did this undiscussed. He knew his presence had always been welcome, but he had never shown up unannounced. The steps up the complex were well lit, and he ascended them quickly. He was in front of the door before he knew it. Only when his hand raised to knock did he actually hesitate. His nerves were going haywire. This was an invasion of privacy, right? He pulled out his phone and sent a message asking if the person inside was awake. His phone pinged back immediately. He didn't open the message, instead knocking on the door. He felt the floor shake like something had fallen inside, and he pulled away the sudden ache of a jarred shoulder. Guilt started to roll through him, but the door swung open.
Izuku, is everything okay?
Yagi was in a baggy shirt and shorts as he held the door wide.
Come in, please.
Izuku felt his eyes start to burn again, and he walked past Yagi into the home. He set his bag down next to the front door. Yagi was quick to pick it up and carried it with them as Izuku went into the kitchenette. Sorry, I didn't want to wake you up, but I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't... Izuku started but cut himself off. They had talked about this. He was supposed to stop with the in-depth and rambling apologies. He wasn't supposed to do it so much from what he had been told. He was about to apologize again, but that would have been defeating the point as well. Yagi put Izuku's bag next to his feet and patted the chair he was standing next to.
It's quite all right, my boy. Please, Have a seat.
Izuku sat and started to pick at the hem of his shirt. He could feel the restlessness he had brought with him into the home.
I'm glad you came when you wanted to. I know it's something that worries you.
Yagi moved around the area in a deceptively calm manner, plugging in his rice cooker and pulling things out of cabinets.
Do you want to talk right now, or did you just not want to be on your own? I could make some miso and rice, and you could take time to settle.
Izuku watched Yagi's hands, their busy motions making his own hands settle. I didn't eat last night, he said simply. It was the truth. It also left the decision-making up to Yagi, though. He hadn't been and still wasn't hungry. Yagi smiled warmly at him and hummed.
I understand that well.
He looked at the whisk in his hand before turning more towards Izuku and holding it out.
Actually, I'm confident you can handle the miso.
Izuku stood quickly and accepted the utensil, grateful to have something to physically do. He set out preparing the soup, focusing entirely too hard on the task, as Yagi finished starting the rice. He listened as dishes were taken down and put at the table. 2 glasses of water were filled. One was set at the table, and the other next to him at the stove. He stayed silent while cooking, and Yagi let him without any sense of awkwardness between them. Yagi even stayed standing at the counter as Izuku filled their bowls with miso soup and then his own bowl of rice. Izuku handed Yagi his bowl of miso. A quiet thanks was exchanged. The bowl stayed cupped in Yagi's hands as Izuku took his seat he had started in once more. They both ate in easy quiet. Izuku ate more than he had the week before when they did this. It felt like being greedy, but he was hungry now that he had started. He was staring into his mostly empty second bowl of miso when Yagi broke their silence.
I take it you set out the things for your mother last night.
He sounded quite hesitant as he brought it up. Izuku could tell in the set of his shoulders on top of the slight burn of his lung that he hadn't been sure how Izuku would appreciate the topic. He took some time to breathe, reassuring himself that he wouldn't immediately break down when he started talking. Ah! He set the bowl on the table, but didn't pull his hands from its warmth. I hated doing it. He could see Yagi's surprise out of the corner of his eye. His breath shook, and he forced it to steady. I don't want her to be gone. It felt like killing her to do it, and I'm not stupid. I know that. He made a frustrated noise and brought his hands to his face, pressing hard against his eyes. I know she can't just magically come back just because I've been wanting her to for years. I know that she isn't gonna be coming back. This isn't changing anything, not really. I miss having a mom. The speckles dancing across his vision distracted him from the tears that were building, from the lump in his throat. And sometimes I wonder that even if he did come back, it wouldn't ever be the same, but I wonder if I would hate her. And it hurts. How awful I have to be to hate her for coming back, especially when all I have ever wanted is for her to come back. It feels like I could just do something and she would be back sometimes and I could just. Izuku looked up at Yagi, the tears streaming, and let out a shaking breath. It just feels like this is somehow my fault. He stopped Yagi before he could put in a word edgewise by continuing. I just feel so alone. Even when I'm near other people, even my friends. They don't know what's happening so often around them, and I feel like I can't say any of it because they're happy. And bringing any of this up ruins that. I feel like I just ruined all of it. I just wish I could just. His breathing hiccuped, and he felt the desperation flood him. How can you do it? How do you handle being so alone at the top of the hero world? Yagi set his empty bowl on the counter. He opened his mouth twice before actually starting.
I didn't. At the start, I was, beyond careless in my care for myself. You can't carry the world on your shoulders and expect to never break. I definitely pushed away anyone I could. I wish I had learned better sooner than I had. In something Gran Torino, I've been taking over the role of my mentor from my predecessor, trying to beat into my thick skull over and over. He had even gone to the extent of sending me to the Americas so that I wouldn't kill myself in the process of training and growing up. It wasn't until I was much older that I came to appreciate the efforts he made, however flawed he had been in execution. There are friendships that come and go, but well and truly, some of the only true friends I have anymore are ones I had made when I was a little older than you. That isn't to say the friends you have now won't last, though. I just
He sighed and ran a hand through his hair.
I neglected to foster the growth of friendships when I came to be underground Torino's teachings. You can look at Izawa-kun and the friends he has. He had met them anyway, and they are still close to them. It's something that takes time and effort to maintain, keeping friends for that long. I mean effort from all members involved, too, not just you.
Izuku wiped away the remnants of his tears as he considered this. He sagged in his chair and sighed, exhausted already for the day. How do I even talk to them? I don't know how to make myself not look pathetic if I talk about anything.
Well, where would you want to start?
Yagi asked, eyes brighter than moments ago, with an intense sense of focus on Izuku's response, like he was actually going to be getting more out of an honest answer than Izuku himself would be. I don't know. I guess I just don't want to feel alone in how I feel right now. He grabbed his bowl of miso to swirl the dregs gently and frowned. That's not the way I wanted that to sound, but it's what I mean. Yagi nodded thoughtfully.
And what makes you feel like you can't talk about this to your friends?
I haven't seen Oka-san since I was like 6. How do I explain that I didn't even have a funeral for her until literally last night? That just is not something I know how to just bring up. It's not a casual topic, and I haven't even told the Bakugos, and they were her friend for years and years before I had been born. She only stopped seeing them so much because of what I am. It's the only reason I can think of for why she stopped. They still want to rekindle the friendship they think is just being neglected. You saw that yourself when we were buying my new bag. They still think she's alive because I've been lying to them for so long.
Slow down, Izuku. You don't have to drop your entire story right from the start. They can get the full picture much later, but still support you now. You can just as easily tell them you lost someone recently and that you could use some support. It is support they are more than ready to already give you. I know you are too smart and observant to have not noticed the worry they have had for you since internships have ended.
Yeah, Izuku murmured into his bowl as he sipped the last of the miso. It was cold now.
They know something is wrong. If you tell them you're grieving the loss of a loved one, I have no doubt they will not pry. They have learned your habits and mannerisms well enough by now to not force you. You can even set up things to do with them so you can be alone less often.
Izuku got up to start clearing up their dishes. Yagi didn't stop him, knowing it was just so Izuku had something to keep him busy.
They want to be there for you, Izuku. That's what friends are for, and if you let them help when and where they want, putting in the effort to return their care when it comes round, they will often stay true.
He put a hand on Izuku's shoulder to stop him as he slipped by.
Even if they don't last forever, friendships and other relationships will help you stay sane and functioning, my boy.
Izuku sagged a bit. He didn't want to talk about it. He knew he would have a breakdown if he did. He would have one if he didn't, too, though, just like he had when Aizawa had forced him to stop before they even had the funeral. I don't think I can do that right now.
I never said you had to do it today. It could be tomorrow, later this week, or even later than that. You have to take care of yourself first.
I don't feel like I deserve it. He looked away from Yagi. He knew this was a topic that looped regularly, albeit it had been easier to bring up lately.
There are lots of old methods that talk about learning to love yourself before others. It's something I personally never really resonated with. It's hard to give love to yourself when you feel undeserving. I had a pet for a bit that I had started with. You give something love that gives it back and you learn that you aren't as undeserving as you thought. People are difficult to start with. You can become suspicious of intentions that are hidden from you. Pets are simple. You love them, and they love you back in whatever manner they can.
Marble didn't want to leave me when I woke up, even when I put her aside so I wouldn't wake her up, Izuku said.
She likely loves you then. Cats aren't ones to seek out and interact with things and people they don't like.
He lifted his hand to let Izuku finish what he was doing.
Unlearning self-appreciation and neglect is hard. You can't help others if you can't keep up with yourself in the first place. You will break, eventually.
Izuku stalled at the stove, hand on the handle of the miso pot. Can I take some miso with me to school?
Of course, my boy. Take as much as you'd like. I have tofu to add too, if you would like to take the time for it.
Izuku glanced at the dishes he had already moved to the sink.
I have plenty of time to do dishes later. You can use whatever you would like here.
Yagi said before Izuku could go too far mentally. Okay. Izuku set the burner back to a low heat. They ended up walking to campus together, and Yagi filled the time easily with stories from when he had been in North America. He had a friend there he still kept in touch with, and an unrelated niece through him. This was something that had Izuku's full attention. He didn't think about the family relations Yagi may have built over the years. As Yagi continued to talk about how he had been this man's senior by a small margin, he brought up the second years he had taught to a few times. Even when he clarified that it was really only twice, Yagi still insisted it was a good thing. Apparently, UA did a rather poor job of encouraging relations between the different years in the hero course due to how intensive it got. While he was walking to class, he could feel that Aizawa was already on campus. It was early even for him, and Izuku wondered if it was just because Izuku had wandered out in the night, or if it was something else. In his seat, the first one in the room, he wonders how he would bring up any of the past night's events. These were his friends, so he should, logically, be able to talk about these things. It's like Yagi said. They're his friends. He wanted so badly to be a friend back to them. He wanted to feel like they knew him as he knew them. He wanted to feel like he actually existed. He looked at his hands and clasped them together hard enough his knuckles ached. I hate how quiet I am. His heart started to race. I just feel so loud all the time, though. He pulled his hands to his chest and dropped his head onto the desk. The door opened to reveal Ida, bright and energetic as usual in the morning. The day had begun. He didn't talk to anyone about it. He felt so stupid as he sat on the balcony with Marble purring in his lap. It shouldn't be this hard to be sad in front of people, should it? He can cry alone. He does cry alone more often than he was willing to admit. He couldn't figure out why it was so hard to just do it. Marble stretched and rolled off his lap onto the concrete. Her blind eyes were squinted as she kneaded the air happily. He watched her a while before running a hand on her chest and belly. She meowed, and he hesitated before he said, I love you. It was barely even a whisper, but it made his chest hurt. His eyes watered. This was stupid. He stood quickly and hurried inside. Marble chirruped questioningly, rolling over and head tilting as she started towards the door. Her ears were pressed forward to try and follow his footsteps. Guilt hit him. He walked so that his feet would pat the floor softly instead of silently. An entire day passed again before he could steel his hammering heart enough to try anything. He was walking with Shinzo, Uraraka, and Ida in the hall back towards their classroom when he just stopped. Lunch had just ended, but he didn't know what they planned for the next period. They stopped barely a step past him and turned to him with questioning looks. Something about how they had stopped so fast, looked so quickly, just settled in his chest. It cemented the reality of what Yagi had said. They're so worried. Of course they were. He knew he had been acting wrong just as they had. They obviously would want to know why he had been acting so unusual. He couldn't figure out how to explain that not acting the way he had would have made him feel physically ill. He glanced at his hands before he decided to just look at the floor past them all. The tears started streaming as he opened his mouth, a hiccuped breath escaping before the words did. Augusta is gone. His words were shaking more than he was. Their shock was immediately evident as he continued. Can I have a hug? I just... He didn't get to finish as he was hit badly. His vision was too blurry to know visually who it was, but even as multiple sets of arms wrapped around him, he knew it was Uraraka. She was smaller than the others. He wrapped his arms around her back, hands gripping the sleeves of Ida and Shinso. It was warm. It was physical pressure he couldn't trick himself into disbelieving. Their grip was firm collectively, and even as none of them spoke, there was no feeling of judgment. He could feel the way Uraraka actually started to shake and cry with him. Shinso's fingers were digging in harder than they needed to, but it didn't hurt. He cried quietly, but he knew class was supposed to start soon. He tried to pull it in. There are still a few minutes until next period, Ida brought up. No one had let go, even as Izuku was still trying to reel himself in. And it is a free practice period, Shinso added, voice sounding unusually rough. We could go somewhere on campus to practice team building? There is no evidence that the exam will be for individuals and not teams. Ida nodded and was the first to pull away. Let's gather the necessary items. He led them down the hall to the room. Shinso had an arm over Izuku's shoulders, and Uraraka kept an arm looped with him as they went. They had stayed in the hall as Ida hurried in and grabbed their bags with a purposeful look on his face. Almost expect a salute out of him sometimes when he gets like this, Shinso muttered conversationally, just filling the quiet to cover Izuku's sniffles and shaky breathing. Outside, as they wandered down one of the paths outside the main building to elsewhere on campus, Izuku heard someone jogging to catch up to them from behind. He turned first from the rest of them. Todoroki was in his gym uniform, his expression neutral as usual aside from his eyes. He must have been on his way to one of the gyms to practice and seen them walking. Izuku tried to offer a small smile, but it crumpled pretty fast, tears falling once more. For as much as he had wanted to be able to cry around his friends, it was awfully hard to stop now that he had. He could see how Todoroki stood just ever so slightly taller at that, and fell in with them. The group continued on their way, and Todoroki was filled in on what Izuku had revealed. A small grove of trees off the walkway was decided on as their place to practice for the current period. Izuku wasn't sure how they were planning to do this practice, but he knew he wasn't up for actual drills or exercises of any kind. Not immediately, at least. They sat in a loose circle, and Ida set their bags around to be within reach. Shinso already had his phone out. Uraraka asked Todoroki what he had been planning before joining them, and he answered her readily enough. Ida had orange juice in a small lunchbox that he pulled out and handed to each of them. You want to play music with Oreo? Shinso asked. The other three continued to talk about the training they had individually planned for the exam. They're trying to give a distraction. Izuku realized it a little belatedly. He pulled out his phone to play some of his music quietly. It was only after a few minutes of him sitting there picking at the grass, Shinso sharing videos with them all, and Uraraka doing the same, that he also noticed they were all either directly or nearly touching him in some way. He could feel the heat of the sun on his back. A knee was pressed against his. A shoe rested on his outstretched leg. There was a slight chill in the air as Todoroki took the time to exercise precise control of his eyes. If this happened to start only after they were beginning to sweat just a bit from the heat, then it was only a coincidence, of course. Shinzo was sharing some absurd story his haha apparently retells frequently. The end of it left the smallest bubbles of laughter in Izuku's chest. It didn't go anywhere, but it had bloomed initially. He started to cry again. He kept his head down and ripped at the grass to try and hide it. It was silent tears as he tried his best to not mess up the energy the others had built. He found this unsuccessful as more videos began to be shared directly with him from more than just Shinso. One of the memes Uraraka showed did actually get a watery breath of laughter out of him. The whole group brightened in the success. It only encouraged them to double down on that thread. When the bell rang for the end of the period, they all gathered their things. Todoroki apologized for having to hurry ahead so he could change out of his gym clothes. Ida carried their bags again as the rest of them walked on the path. Izuku was in the middle of them all. Before they entered the building, though, Izuku hesitated.
Hey,
Shinzo nudged him.
you've got this.
We're here for you, Uraraka added. You don't have to carry this alone, Midoriya. Izuku sighed, trying his hardest to not shake as badly as his body wanted to. Yeah,